by two. Marauder, Nicto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm fine.
You went for the voice. I was gonna try and do it like welcome to. Yeah, it doesn't. I don't think I could sustain it for the amount of time that I would need to do it. But yeah. For anyone wondering what the hell we're talking about, if you haven't already watched the film and you haven't seen the title of this one, we are covering Alphaville from 1965, a French new wave noir sci-fi film. The story of a secret agent, Lemmy Caution, which I'm not entirely sure if it's supposed to be a joke name or not, who is sent to Alphaville, which, and I'm going to... Okay, may or may not be on another planet. And Alphaville is run by a scientist and uses an AI called Alpha 60 to run things on logic, and therefore all sort of emotions and things have been, or certain emotions are outlawed, and over time certain words are also forbidden. He is there to bring the scientist, Professor Von Braun, back, or at least offer him the opportunity before Alphaville is to be destroyed or enter into a war. In doing so, he falls in love with, does he? I don't know. He grows potential feelings, or
he says he's in love. They're supposed to be in love.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
With the scientist's daughter, Natasha Von Braun, and the film ends with them escaping Alphaville. Let's talk about this. So it's a French film from 1965, so it's in French. Not a problem. The subtitles are all fine. Let's start with you, Julian. What were your initial thoughts about this film?
Well, this is sort of a classic of French science fiction. And I didn't see this until relatively late. I'm not in love with this film. I mean, this is the second or third time that I've seen it. I'm not in love with this film, and I think that, I'm not in love with Godard and French New Wave in general. But, I think that I often find myself thinking about this film. I think that it is visually and in its concepts kind of arresting. It's very bizarre. It sort of reminds me of like a French version of Brazil. Like, I kept thinking of Brazil during it rather than like what we would normally think of, which would be like, say, a 1984 adaptation or something. This is closer to that. There's a lot of just stuff that's weird. What did you think?
No, Brazil is one of the touchdowns I actually did think about. I agree. There's others as well. Like, I want to mention the comparisons to Blade Runner and a few others as well. But the difference is with this. So you say you're not in love with this film. I would happily kick this film around an alleyway and then leave it for dead. Like
no,
that's probably too far. It took me 2 sittings to get through this film. And not because it was pushing me over that, but like that. You see about the visuals, and some of the visuals in this are very stunning. There are some very, very well shot scenes. But then there are whole sequences that I'm expecting to sort of end. They're almost like a cologne advert or like like a perfume advert. Where there's a sequence. I'm expecting it to be like Mystery by Godard. It's just like I don't know what this is doing for the plot. I don't know what's I'm not entirely sure how this is helping. I don't understand why these characters are doing some of the things. Did not surprise me when I was reading up some notes on this, that it was suggested that Godard didn't even have a script for this when he started filming. And so there are sequences he was just like, I want to film this. And I'm like, oh, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that there's a lot that is sort of indulgent. And, I think art is by its nature indulgent, right? But there's a lot that is sort of has that sense of capriciousness to it. And I think that's fine. I mean, some of the stuff that we like the most has a certain sense of that, but I don't know. I think that's typical of Godard. I think that's typical, like you see like Breathless, and this is very much sort of in that spirit of sort of an outsider who has violent tendencies, right? In a society that is depicted as sort of fascistic or hostile to him. And in all of those movies, characters just kind of do things. There's a sort of, I think there's a sort of feeling, and I have this sometimes too, that sort of something like characters and people kind of just do things. They don't always know why they're doing it. But that is compounded here by the fact that we're not supposed to really understand this foreign culture. And that stuff I love, right? Like in Brazil, it feels more like Tim Burton-esque kind of like, golly gee, this is silly. This is, not silly. This is bizarre, right? For bizarreness sake. Here, I feel like I'm immersed in an alien culture, so to speak. I don't think it really is in another galaxy, but I'm immersed in this bizarre culture of another town, another civilization, and basic thing like words don't mean the same things, which is true when you go to a foreign country or something.
Yeah, there are certain ideas and themes in this film I really like. I will admit that. And so this idea of words becoming forbidden, and so there's a whole sequence at the end where she's talking about the word conscience, and I like that. And even the sort of phrase of like love you and all this other stuff. And she's like, oh, that's sort of like why what she sort of says about the word why what I didn't use that. And she said, well, yeah, you did last night. When did I use it? And she's like, I don't know what it means. We don't say why, we just say because, we sort of. However, and all that's fine. And I kind of like that in some cases. However, there are other things that just sort of bothered me. So this whole thing is about it's about an AI. This society is run by Alpha 60, which makes probability calculations, and then decisions are based on that. That's the whole predilection of this, right? And it's about sort of not knocking that and living within that, but then they have these executions that seem to be sort of like, so you talk about logic. The idea is to have logic, okay? And so there's an execution scene where they're killing people, and one of them's because he wept when his wife died and stuff. And we're getting rid of emotion and stuff. Okay, so you're getting rid of emotion. However, you are then playing off executions as a form of entertainment, and you have synchronized swimmers diving in to retrieve the body, and then people clapping. But if you're trying to say that's an entertainment, then why? Because that's a show of emotion, which makes no logic. So you're all guilty of the same thing as the guy who just wept for his wife. So yeah, there were scenes like that throughout where I'm like, the logic in this makes no sense. Like, it's not thought out. It didn't work in that, like, you're saying about this alien society. And I'm like, no, it gives you the premise and then doesn't stick to the premise.
But the thing is, it doesn't make, I have to disagree with you. First of all, I see what you're saying. I don't disagree with the point. But first of all, let's agree that having synchronized swimmers pick up the corpses of people who have been executed is fucking brilliant, and that by itself makes
that was when Brazil. That was when Brazil came to mind. I was like, oh, that's a Gilliam kind of touch. Like, Gilliam's clearly watched this film, and yeah.
Oh yeah, and both of them have, Gilliam has some of that sense of like, it doesn't need to make sense, right? It makes sense emotionally, right? But like you say, well, entertainment is emotion too. Well, to a certain degree, but it's not. I mean, you can classify anything as emotion, right? Like, you could say, why is there war? Because war is based on hating the enemy or something. Well, a society that is anti-emotion is probably going to have war nonetheless. it's entertainment, but you don't see them like giggling and stuff. They're sort of like going through a fascistic show of clapping and sort of like, isn't that dictator great? And I think this gets to some of, I mean, of course it doesn't have to be understood, but I think it gets to some of this point of like how that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to us, but we go into like, whether it's like, Iran or, dictatorial societies where they have certain rules, but then they have these contradictions where you'd say, how is this not an obvious contradiction? It's like, well, that's not seen as emotion within this context. I do agree that it's obvious that, like, Alpha 60 in this sort of AI run society is not based on logic. I mean, it's not running like a well-oiled machine, it's bizarre. But I will say, like, some of those contradictions are inherent to totalitarian regimes, right?
Yeah, and that's fair, and that's fine. But then you need to expand upon that within the film, and that's the point. Like, there's no other sort of like. So you get this one scene, but no one, even your main protagonist, who's pretending to be a journalist, and is only sort of shown to be a journalist because he takes photos of everything, which also starts to bother me after a while. But we'll get to that. Is the fact that should be then leveled up? Like, he should be saying, like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, if he is going to be the point of view character, then at least have him say, like, because she tells him he's being killed. This guy's been executed for having wept over the death of his wife. And him saying, like, well, what, you're here to celebrate that? Like, what is this? You're showing sort of like an act of, there's no logic to this. Like, he needs to question it, and needs to be, at least then be put in his place. But it's never sort of like, because he says, like, because later on he actually says, like, he's like, it's clear he doesn't understand it. And then later on he's like, oh, I'm starting to understand this place. But it's quite clear, and it's brought up repeatedly. You either get with Alphaville, and that's the best way to survive, or you end up killing yourself because it's too messed up. And so it's this weird thing of like, I constantly was going like, I want to understand that. Like, I want to try and understand how that is happening. So why is it? Who is one of these people that's been driven like footsie? Like, who's gone crazy in this thing? Because you introduced to his friend. Is it Henri or Henry? Is it sort of the guy who's in the shady, like the skeezy hotel?
Henri Dickinson.
That's it, Henri. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, cool. This is going to be that character where you're going to go like, he's almost like, at one point I was like, oh, he's going to be like a former agent. Like, he was the one who was sent before and he failed, and he's become this sort of like, staying here's driven him mad. And that doesn't come to anything. And I was just like,
no.
Oh,
well, I mean, if I wrote this movie, I would have a lot of those things that you're talking about. I would want to make things clearer, right? That's my logical instinct, right?
Yeah.
This is a movie that is anti-logic. I mean, literally,
yes.
The AI, it's French. I mean, the French are not a rigid Germanic sort of like the trains will fucking run on time society. They're all, so many French movies end with like, you have to listen to your heart, and you're like, what the fuck? You're in space. Why, whatever. Why? How is that? As if like, serial killers don't listen to their heart, right? But so I mean, I have some of those problems with this, but I do think that, like, first of all, there is no audience identification character.
No.
Right? Because Lemmy Caution, the main character, you don't know. He keeps insisting he's a reporter. He's clearly not. It's kind of an open secret that he's not. But he's coming from a society that we don't understand either. And I do kind of love this idea. And I think about my own sort of Martian comics and sort of like immersing people in this alien culture. I do kind of like this idea of like, okay, a guy goes to a city that he doesn't understand, but he's from a culture that is also alien, right? And isn't that true anyway, right? I mean, there's a lot of, when you read a story about, like Marco Polo, Marco Polo doesn't come from a society that we understand anymore, and the whole story was made up anyway. Was embellished greatly. So I don't know. I mean, I kind of like this idea of, it's true, we don't know anything, but it's sort of like a story of somebody going to Japan, which is, people say, like, you can live there for 30 years and as a Westerner and not understand anything about the essence of Japan. Or somebody who goes to the Soviet Union, at the height of the Soviet Union, and it's like, right, there are things I understand, but there's also stuff that just seems completely closed off and foreign to me. There are signals and signs of danger or whatever that I don't understand.
I get what you're saying. I understand. I appreciate that you are right. It's sort of like we're external. These are two alien cultures coming together, and we are external to that. We are a third party, a third country, if you will. But I've seen films that do that. Like, I've watched, like, I will think like early Jackie Chan or like Hong Kong cinema, or sort of like Southeast Asian cinema, where it's like, oh, like, yeah, I'm not privy to this, but it's going to be sort of like Korean cinema, and you're going to have, or even like Hong Kong cinema, like the whole thing is set into the culture. All right, that's fine. I've got no problem with that, and often there are films I really enjoy that do that, right? That have that sort of like fish out of water or clash of cultures, and I'm not part of either of them. How that works, or how I then identify, is one of the characters at least has to be likable. Do you know what I mean? Like, you have to be go, oh, I don't understand them, but at least I'm a sort of like, I'm able to sort of like, maybe not identify, but I can side with that person. Like, I side and understand what's going on, and I can back that sort of person's motivation or whatever. But like you say in this one, let me caution, it's just he's such a sort of a noir sort of stereotype that, like, it's just, he's so aloof throughout that I'm just like, oh, okay, like, you're just he is so two-dimensional as a character. I'm just like, yeah, fine, I know you are the main character, so I'm going to follow you, but like, I don't feel anything. Well, yeah. But I'm like, I don't feel anything.
That's fair. I mean, I sometimes I have a problem with this idea of like needing to like a character, and we've talked about this before. That like, there are times where I feel that, and I feel pissed off at a character, or where I don't have anyone I can identify with. I mean, I would say, at other times I don't feel that need at all. And others do. I don't know what I feel about that here. I do think that he does seem like a cipher, but I don't know that he's two-dimensional. It just seems like we can't see inside him. I mean, he's on a mission where he's got to present this front, right? I mean, he's a film noir character. He's on it's like watching a spy go into the Soviet Union, and you don't know whether he's a spy throughout most of the movie. Now, this is not done the way we want that movie to be done, right? We'd want the reveal, and we'd want him to talk to, the girl he loves and say, listen, I am a spy, and we need to get out of here. And he kind of does that, but yeah, he does seem, I don't know, sort of, he has that cipher-like old school masculinity.
Yeah, but again, you're saying like, that's it, like an old school masculine, like, he slaps people around, and like, again, though, like, he does. Like,
I know, no, you're right.
And I'm fine with all of that. Like you say, this is from the 60s. It's got it's got that noir message. Humphrey Bogart did this as Sam Spade and the characters. I've got no problem with following a sleazy character. But you've got to give something to make it worth my while, and I just don't feel that. To the extent of, like, again, I think this comes down to the way some of it's filmed, and again, it's weird because there are interactions between Lemmy and Natasha that almost reach like an emotional level. Like, she's actually good. I like her. Like Akim Tamaroff, who plays Natasha Von Braun.
Anna Karina is.
That's it. Yeah. Oh, Anna Karina. I've just put the wrong. Yeah, Anna Karina. Eddie Constantine is the is Lemmy. Yeah. Anna Karina, like, she's good. Like, there are scenes in this, like, where she's sort of conveying confusion and cutting, and sort of like, she's that one of like, again, if this was an American or an English one, like there would be the over explosion of emotion of sort of like, I've been lied to my entire life, and I've all this other stuff. Like, but she sort of works through it a little bit by like, yeah, no, I don't know what this word conscience means. I'm trying to look for it, and I like the fact that they refer to it as the Bible. And so at first I was a bit like, oh, that again, I was going to call that out and go, oh, how's this logical? And they're still dedicated to a Bible. But then you find out the Bible isn't the Bible. It's actually a dictionary and is replaced on a regular basis as new words are introduced and old words are forbidden. And I loved that. To the extent that at one point she's looking for the word conscience and a guy comes in and just takes it and replaces it into her hand and says, it's not in there, and carries on. And I was like, brilliant. That I loved. And she's really good at that. Like, she conveys some of that confusion of like, I sort of know this word. I know the thing that goes with it, but I can't tell you what it is. And so there were moments like that where I'm like, oh, cool. It's leaning into something I can enjoy and I can sort of like tap into. And then that goes again. And I'm just like, all right, fair enough.
Yeah, I would agree that, I mean, the irony is this is a sort of French pro-emotion movie to some degree that doesn't let you emotionally connect with the characters.
Yeah.
And that's certainly true. I agree with you. And I do like those elements that you're talking about, and I do like Natasha sort of struggling with that. I guess I would say that, like the French say that they're sort of good at making artsy movies, and the Americans are good at making crappy, accessible movies. And once in a while, the two can converge, and you get like a Chris Nolan or something that, is smart enough, but, and artsy enough, but still accessible, right? And you don't have to write a dissertation about it to understand it or something.
No, I yes. I'm going to counter that, though, with one thing, though, right? So you are right, and I agree. Then there is a sheen of art across this. And I'm going to put that in inverted commas, right? There's a sheen of art across this. However, because I would say that there are we have watched other films that have had that sort of sheen and done it better. So we've talked about Solaris. Let's sort of foreign films, or at least the European language films, Solaris and Eyes Wide Shut, the Spanish version, and that sort of thing. Like, there's a sheen of that, but it works better. What both of those had that I felt this was lacking was cohesion in its technical ability. So yes, there was a great shot, maybe, but then the transition, like basically the editing in this film is atrocious. There are scenes that are clearly like 2 seconds or a second or two too long. There's ones that get cut off. And I wouldn't say it's intentional because it's really disruptive. Like, I don't mind, cutting to like a close-up shot of somebody's face or something that's completely unrelated, or a clock or some shit like that. But do it in a nice, slick, well-edited way. The editing in this film is awful. It's clunky and it's badly done, and I think that damages that artistic intent.
I think you're right. I think I do have to agree with that. I think that the worst example of that are the inverted shots, where you start near the end, you get these shots that are in negative. Why are those moments in negative? There's no reason whatsoever. It does feel like a film school student being artsy, as opposed to, going off on some sort of, really artistic tangent where you're indulging in a coherent scheme. It does seem a little film school student at those times. And I do think there's a sort of like version of this that is, or a remake that, knows what it's doing and is a little more direct with its plot. And as you say, like edited in a way so you understand what's going on more. At least you don't have to understand the culture or who the characters are, but you understand like the basics of the plot. So much of this is like, I mean, obviously this is a version of Paris, right? It's shot in Paris. So much of this is like driving around. And I did keep wondering, like, because you don't speak French, like there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, how would you make sense of this if you don't speak French? There's a lot of like signs and writing that is not translated, and they're driving around, and there's like a ceinture or like a périphérique, like a road around the city that they are driving on apparently, and then you keep seeing like nord, sud, right, like north and south. They're going to these like districts, and they're always driving around, but you don't have a sense of like where are they? What does this mean? It is very, it doesn't tell the story. It's not really concerned with telling the story.
No, most definitely. I mean, it's interesting because coming off the back of The Fly, we talked about the Cronenberg remake, and obviously we mentioned like The Thing being another good example. Like, yeah, there's a modernization of this that I think would be, and yeah, like we often joke, and like, I wouldn't give it to Michael Bay, but like, yeah, like a Nolan or I don't know, there are directors I'd be like, yeah, you could do this, and you could make it meaningful, and you could get some themes, and you could really talk about alienation and this thing. I mean, you talk about the plot as well. At one point, and it's mentioned once, and it never comes up again, and it's never been a driver for anything. But about like 2/3 of the way, it sort of comes towards the final act. He mentions an atomic weapon coming for Alphaville, and I'm like, okay, was this like a ticking clock? Like, was it always? Was he working against the clock? Is this because that was he never acted like he was under stress to get things done in time? And then after that, like even after he uses it to tell Natasha that there's this threat and they have to leave, but then even after that, they're sort of in this really sort of relaxed way of sort of going like, well, okay, we'll do this and we'll do that. And it's sort of, I'm like, hang on, no, what's happening with this nuclear threat that's coming? Like, what's happening?
Right. And you're right. I mean, I feel the same thing. It's sort of thrown out there. And I mean, again, yeah, technically that was there, and he's trying not to let on that, his mission is to get, Werner von Braun, the equivalent, out before the nuclear strike. But there never is like a conversation about like, yeah, your society, wherever you come from in the outer countries, is about to annihilate millions of people. Are you better than the society? I mean, where's the morality here? It's very that is very strange.
No, exactly. You've just said something that I was looking for in this film. I think is vastly lacking, because you say like it's not about the plot, right? Yet you have like Alpha 60 spouting this garbled philosophical crap throughout the film, like, and it's like they're reading some again. And there are moments when
he quotes Borges actually.
Well, this is what I'm saying. No, sometimes, but this the point is, there are sections where the philosophical lines that are being spoken connect, and you go, oh, okay, I see where it's going. At one point, she talks about the circle of life and death and all this other stuff, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting where this is sort of, what you're thinking. And then there's other times I'm like, I'm sure this is very philosophical. Doesn't seem to relate to anything that's happened on the screen or anything that's happened before. Like, I don't know what the point is. Like, it's filling a moment. But what I was hoping for, like, he does meet Professor von Braun at the end. And I was waiting for some sort of like philosophical head-to-head. So exactly what you've said. Well, how is your society any better than mine? We have order and logic and da-da-da-da. And he's like, they have this very brief talk of like, thingy. And at one point he talks about poetry or something, or, creativity. But there's nothing there to say about how spirituality and faith and instinct are any better than sort of like pure intelligence and all this other stuff. Like, or even there's, I don't know, I was hoping for something along those lines to have that philosophical debate, or at least maybe portray it in some way. I don't know,
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you, but like thinking about what's good about this movie and what the problems would be in our sort of like imagined sort of reboot, right? Or a new version of it. The problem is always going to be that presumably American director, and I don't think a British director would be any better. Is that our instinct would be to underline those things, right? To have that philosophical debate, and to have those moments of like where you morally stand in this, right? The bad guys are really bad, the good guys are good. Maybe there's a little gray area, but they have these clear discussions. And I think that is absolutely wrong. I mean, that kind of thing would cause this film to collapse instantly. It seems to me that if you want to talk about like this as an espionage movie, I mean, if you do it as like, Tinker Tailor, where I mean, there's a good side and a bad side, but it's pretty gray, and everybody knows that it's really gray, and no secret agent worth his salt is going to go on a moral rant about how, the West is so much purer and better. And in fact, if somebody does, watch the fuck out, because they've got a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's the tone that we have trouble doing, especially in, the sort of blockbuster, the sort of, made for everybody kind of movie. Well, and this avoids that quite well. I mean,
Stallone did it.
in
Demolition Man, it has those two, but he stands in the middle. It says like, you get dirty, you get a lot clean.
But I mean that you can't do that. I mean, that is nonsense.
No, I'm just deciding now.
You can't do that with
Alphaville. It's going to be Demolition Man 2, Alphaville.
Yeah.
I know what you mean now. I know exactly what you're saying. You can't moralize on either side of the equation, because then you're right. It takes away a lot from what the film is intending to do, and so I agree with that. But you need at least to lay the arguments out.
Yeah,
that's what you need to do.
Well, I think you need a little more coherence, both about what they're doing, where they are. But I mean, some of the stuff that, at the same time that I say that, some of the stuff that I love best about this film is stuff that is totally incoherent. I mean, I watching it again, I'd forgotten, I mean, it sort of starts with Lemmy Caution. You don't even know his name until later. And I love Eddie Constantine, who plays him, this sort of like, he's classic gruff macho kind of guy, sort of ugly. Arrives in Alphaville. He checks into a hotel. There's a girl who's kind of like assigned to him, and they keep having these girls like a seductress third class, and like, what is going on here? Like, there's some kind of like gender role where anyone who comes in from out of town is like seduced, or do these girls, like the line about like, I come with the hotel room,
they're prostitutes. They're prostitutes, because that's how I took it. Like, they're assigned to the hotel because they've all numbered. They've all got numbers on the back of their necks, and he gets another one later on. There's a brunette. Who he again basically tells him to lose weight. Now, these are very beautiful women. Like, it's very attractive, and sort of like he's getting ready, and all of a sudden, like, she's just in her bra and panties, and she's like, I can help you. She's having a bath at one point while he's having a fight. Like, all that sort of stuff's going on. Which again, I have to ask about.
Well, that's what I was going to reference. It's like right away, this girl goes in. She's thinking about a guy is in the room. Like, I found a man in the room, and I shot him. It's like, and that just is like passed over as if like, well, that's just a thing that happens here, and it's so bizarre. Yeah, go ahead about the prostitutes.
You're right, because at one point it's referenced very slightly later on when he says about having killed a guy in his room.
Yeah,
and everyone's like, it happens, and you're just like, oh, all right, fine. When he goes to see Henri in the sort of like the sleazy hotel or the bed sit or wherever it is, there was a seductress there as well, and she goes with Henri. And he pays her. Mm-hmm. In fact, she then takes money out of his pocket. So it's clear that they are prostitutes, and you can turn them away, but they are assigned to the hotel, as in like it's got that sort of that service is available to you, readily available,
right,
to single men. And I find that interesting. Like, again, it's that thing you're saying about world. No, I did say about it, but this is what I was looking for in it: world building. You say about the alien culture, and it should be alien. All right, but show me it's alien enough to be like, yeah, I don't understand why this. I don't have to relate to it, but I need to at least see how this world is built. And there are times when it's sort of like they have. That's one of the ideas I'm liking. I'm like, cool.
Well,
They've got these ideas.
I'm aware that they're prostitutes. My question is like, are they're sort of like assigned to, I'm not sure that they're like assigned to the hotel or if they move around in the city, right? I don't know. But it seems like they have some sort of reporting to the state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they are not just agents of an independent hotel. They're tagged and numbered, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some centralized gender Handmaid's Tale stuff going on here, but like instead of Handmaid's Tale being focused on women as mothers, this is women as sex, right?
Yes. Well, I think for me, and I wasn't entirely sure what to make of it, but one of the points, but one of the things I noticed, because he sees that she has the seductress has a number on the back of her neck later on. But then later in the film, towards the end, he asks to see the back of Natasha's neck, and she has a number as well. Now, we have not seen any other women in this film to know that it's all women. We've only been shown that these centrally assigned prostitutes are numbered, and she has one too. So the only thing I can take is, okay, well, she's been numbered for a purpose. Now, I'm not saying she's a prostitute, but it shows that there's sort of like a control in place. And so I thought that was interesting, that sort of like to bring that up with Natasha in that respect.
Yeah, and if you want to run a sort of feminist criticism of it, I mean, this is a sort of a classic French film that supposes there is no role for a woman unless she is young and beautiful, you know, which is true of cinema in general, right? But here it's literally a town where okay, the town is depicted as bad in some ways, but I mean, I do like, I don't know, I was thinking of Lost in Translation, which is a terrible, terrible film, but this idea of like, one of the scenes that sticks with me is the prostitute, Bill Murray with the prostitute, and sort of not understanding how this works and what the emotions she's depicting are. And I think that this is very similar to that. Like, she comes with a room. How does this work? Why is she taking a bath in my hotel room? Like, why is she unmoved by a fight? Like, this is just something that happens. I don't get involved in the fights. One of you will kill each other, but it's none of my business. Like, it's so foreign, and I do love that sense of it being utterly foreign.
Oh yeah, there are moments like this. I'm a fan of the weird, and I've said that. And I like, again, talking about like Terry Gilliam and taking the extent. So there are things in this that I'm like, cool, that's kind of it. And I'm saying the world building, the weird world building, I'm kind of digging. I mean, there are moments in this that I like when they are those weird world building. I like the interview that Alpha 60 gives him. He's taken and he's sort of like crammed into this room with these microphones all hanging around him, and they'd ask a series of questions and stuff. And I like that scene again because I'm like, okay, that feels like very much like sort of that fascist state where I'm like, oh, you've put your head above the parapet and we don't like that, so we're going to pull you in and ask you a series of questions. So all that, I was again like, these things I'm digging. You've got these sort of like I don't know, like G-men, these sort of like officers of the state that just turn up and give him a bit of a kick in and then take him away and stuff like. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm getting this. But there's not just one room; there's lots of them. And as he's been taken along, you have the froggy voice going, sort of like, whether it's free or occupied. And so it's just telling people sort of like this one's occupied. And so there's a whole heap of other people going through a similar interrogation. So all that, I was like, oh, this is cool. Or
torture, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
worse,
we don't know.
Exactly, yeah. So that, I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, I'm digging this, where I'm learning something about how this state is twisted, or how it sort of like, how it enforces this logic. Because this is where I'm going, like, this should be the argument. Yes, I understand I can understand the need for logic. I understand about making the right decisions based on probability. I understand logic, but you are torturing your own people to reach that end. How is that logical? You know, that's the sort of like those are the sort of things I want to see.
You want that interrogated, right? I mean,
yeah,
but
a little bit.
yeah, and yeah, okay. So we'll come back to the idea of logic, but I mean, I do think that totalitarian regimes like to say that they are logical
Yes,
or divine, or and
but
then the reality is, sure, it's
but
not.
but those are all led by a person. Those are all
Yes,
led by a human being. This is not. This is led by an AI, and so that's supposed to be the
right,
differentiation of that.
right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, but it's written by a
Human
person.
being.
I
Yeah.
mean, and in most depictions, I mean, look, is Skynet remotely logical? Absolutely not. It makes no sense. I mean, but it's fun and we forgive it. I mean, I think that, to me, one of the things that I was taken back by this upon this viewing was how that theme of logic versus emotion, and you suggesting a sort of synthesis at the end, Demolition Man style. A better example of that, from a better film, is Metropolis,
Mm.
which which has this as its central kind of premise, and ends with the union of these two things, right? Which doesn't work and is still stupid. But here we're really, I mean, obviously in the 60s, this idea of sort of efficiency and machines taking over and computers, and the idea that we're losing our humanity some way in this process. This is a very 60s idea, right?
Mm.
What I thought watching this now, 55 years later, give or take, was I grew up with a lot of those ideas, right? About not denigrating the importance of the nobility of man, right? I mean, that's shot through Star Trek and everything else. And I thought, yeah, little did we realize that it was the emotional people who would establish the fascist state.
Yeah.
That the fear today is not computers. It's not a society that's organized and says, you know what, you live and you die because the medicine to keep you alive at 80 is going to, cost $2 million literally for these procedures, and you're going to live 2 more months, right?
Mm.
The state is not going to pay for that. Well, that's death panels, right? The fear today is not too much logic. My fear today is, well, we have alternative facts. We just believe in what we want to believe, and we are ratcheted up into the most emotional, like Christianity is on trial, and our nation is on trial, and it's all emotional all the time. And I think I'd much rather have Alpha 60. That's not true.
But you are right. No, I agree. Like you say about this sort of thing of the fear of logic and everything. I mean, that was one of the big tracks of the Cold War. I mean, you and I sort of, came up as kids in the 80s. I was too small to worry about the bomb or nuclear, the nuclear deterrent or everything. But I was well aware of our fear of robots in the 80s as a kid. Like, they were either your best friend or the thing that was destroying the world. Like, there's no in the middle. It was that's how it worked.
Skynet or batteries not included.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like Johnny Five or the Terminator. Like, there's no alternative. And so I find that you're right. There was this fear of sort of automation, and because this is the thing again, coming out of the automation, factory automation, job automation, all of that was rampant, and so people feared it. And that was that. You're right. It was this fear of losing control, but that drove this other shift to the other way. In part, started in sort of the 90s, but I think was actually really propelled by the war on terror.
Mm.
Because you have, instead of sort of having, with the Cold War, it's a war of ideologies. It's almost like political ideologies, isn't it? It's that was the idea. It was like democracy versus communism, or capitalism versus communism, however you want to say it. but it was about these bulk ideologies, and so you can sort of have that cold blocker between the two. When you introduce sort of like fanaticism and religion and stuff, it becomes a lot more personal because it becomes about an individual's faith. And I think we've just swung into that way, as you said, sort of this thing about the sovereign individual that you and I have sort of like jokingly talked about in the past, is exactly that. And that's where, again, you want to talk about where Lemmy caution has come from. That push that, where have Von Braun going like, the reason I set this up is because of the absolute shit show that you've got in the outer countries, where you're all driven by your own individual desires and needs, and you all want to be all creative all the time, and nothing ever gets done, and it's chaos. Like, that's the sort of the counter, and that's you are totally right. It's that thing of the selfish need of going like, well, I am me, and I want to be recognized as a me. It's fine, but we also form this social contract where we've got to work as a flipping team, not as individuals. And so
and decisions have to be made logically, right? I mean, sometimes look, I'm anti-car culture, but sometimes you've got to put the highway in an efficient route, and that means you've got to buy out and demolish a house. Sorry, I know it's your house. Sucks to be you. I hope you're paid adequately, but you don't get to be like a cause celeb for crying in the newspapers and on TV, and it's this kind of absolute denial of running a society by any kind of logic that gets you. I mean, there's a thin line sometimes between, or potentially there is, between this sort of like French, the rules are kind of guidelines. I'm going to hang out and smoke pot in the park and drink wine and, sort of classic presentation of French society or French prejudices. And, what we have here, which is like the Christian Taliban, saying, and I don't know that the truth is, and this is why I don't take the sense of logic in this movie all that seriously. I think the movie wants us to, but it doesn't really work. Like you say, it's not really that logical society, and no totalitarian state, was ever in reality, outside of science fiction, created along logical principles. They were created along religious principles. They were created along, control.
This is the thing in, especially in this country, because we don't have logic. We sort of like we like to think we do. We pretend we do, and then we do something completely different. But we have tried to build cities in the most logical way possible. Milton Keynes is a really good example of this. We've gone, look, we're going to take the American model. It's all in squares. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. And then you look at it and you go, yeah, nobody wants to live there because there's nothing there. There's no one, because it's not attractive. There's no culture there. There's nothing there. But then you go to say York, which is almost 1,000+ years old. It's a nightmare to drive around. It's awful even to walk around, but it's beautiful. It's got culture, and you want to be there and be a part of it. And I think that's this thing, isn't it? This idea of sort of being a part of things that's got history and those sorts of things. And to talk about logic and people, like, especially you and I at the moment going through our countries, and I can talk to the British experiences. We're going through a cost of living crisis, petrol, fuel, everything, food getting more expensive. And we're going through a leadership race. Our current he may have resigned, but he's in sitting until somebody else takes his job, is off gallivanting and having parties and doing other stuff. Like, he's not leading. So we're going through a leadership race in which we have the former Chancellor of the Exchequer saying, well, in a cost of living crisis, this is what we should be doing because this makes economic sense. Everyone boos and hisses at him. And so he goes, okay, well, we'll do this instead. And you go, hang on, no, like, that's not logic. That's you milk into the crowd. And then Liz Truss doing whatever happens to be on the scrap piece of paper in front of her because she's a fucking idiot. But this is what I'm saying. Like, our leadership isn't dictated where it should be by common sense and logic. It's dictated by staying in power and whatever they feel is their right. And I think that's the problem. And so I do find the notion of Alphaville appealing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are living in a time when I'm like, no, do you know what? Sorry, and I had this a little bit when we talked about Westworld season 3. So yeah, whilst I was down on the season overall for many of the many things, there was a part of the season which we talked about was the AI ascribing jobs and location and all that kind of stuff, and that made sense because it was like, oh, it's an informed decision. You're going to live this long. You've got this intelligence. You've got these illnesses, whatever. And so you are going to be this job, this role. And we were like, oh, cool. And but the show wanted to say, this is control, this is bad, blah, blah. And we kept saying, but show me the kid that's been pulled out of poverty to show how this has actually been a benefit. Like, why did this was a good idea. It started out with the best of intent. Show me that best of intent. And I feel the same with Alphaville. When you're like, okay, if this has come out of something chaotic and they've gone, this is the alternative. We hand over control over to this AI and it makes probability-based logical decisions. Show me the benefit of that. Like, you know, I'd be like, yeah, I'm living in a chaotic world being led by idiots that needs this logic. And so Alphaville, Alphaville is an appealing idea, but I need to see it in such light for it to work.
Yeah, and obviously when we say it's an appealing idea, we don't mean executions of people for crying, you know.
No, maybe not.
But you know, or not being able to find any woman over, say, 28.
Yeah.
You know, so obviously there are problems, but I know exactly what you mean. I think that ultimately, like Brazil, doesn't present a depiction of a society, really. I mean, this is a movie that is much more concerned with touching on these ideas and painting a painting rather, you know, an impressionistic sort of portraiture rather than, you know, giving a crosscut of a society that you could really understand it. Not to mention a lot of the films that do that, we still have complaints that they don't do it enough, and we don't really know what it's like to live there, you know.
No, that's a very good point. And that yeah, just to sort of bring it to the next point, because saying that, I was just thinking about that, you know, the opposing forces and having that as an appeal. But one of the things that I mentioned before, I want to get back to the logic. In fact, let's do that first, because it's worth sort of doing that off the back of this. Let's explore the logic and this need for logic as we are. So in this film, there are two moments when Alpha 60 says this is the only logical conclusion. And as you say, this is written by a human, it's written by a person. And so I was like, oh, okay. They talk about the threat he discusses the threat from the outer countries. And so it says, well, the only conclusion, the logical conclusion, is basically to attack them first before they attack us. And I was like, okay, that seems like a really sort of extreme logic. I was like, surely it would be, you know, the logic is I've got to protect as many people as possible, so I should be my logic would be prevent war at you know, at any cost, sort of thing. So how do I negotiate? How do I engage with the outer sort of thing? It's not I'll bomb them first so I can sort of, like, you know, because that worries me. Then I'm like, oh, hang on, we're handing over genocide and to a computer, and everyone seems okay with that sort of thing. And the other thing is, obviously, you talk about these executions. It does, when talking to Lemmy later on, the second time he's being interviewed, and they sort of know he's a secret agent, or at least it's strongly understood he is. It says, well, the only logical conclusion is to kill you. And again,
they should kill him.
Yeah, but again, I'm like, surely, like, you know, you'd want to be sort of, the logical conclusion is I'm going to actually imprison you because you may be valuable as an asset down the line.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem with a lot of depictions of, like, AIs. I recently concluded the Orville season 3, which is masterful. But it focuses a lot on Isaac, this android character, and it's done well. But just like Data on Star Trek, most of the responses are sort of like, yeah, that doesn't follow. I can think of a more logical response. I mean, and part of the problem is when you're talking about social statements, like social policies, attacking, the outer countries, or how do we handle this spy? When those are big nebulous questions, right? There's not a black or white, right? It's not chess. And even chess, it's not clear. You could talk about probabilities, but you can't talk about this is right, this is wrong.
Yeah.
So these are like the output of a calculation, right? We look at that output as humans and say, that's what we care about. But in fact, that's the end of a gigantic amount of ratiocination, of contemplating societies and policies and, setting examples and things like this that are really complex. And so I think that's the problem, is we want an output that is logical to us. And obviously an AI is not concerned with that, right? That's the human output. That's not the work, right?
But is that not dependent on what you program?
Yeah.
The AI, because you could program it for the human output, couldn't you? And say, right, your actual active objective is to sustain and maintain life. If Alphaville, of all citizens of Alphaville, and you go, okay, well, does that not change?
But that's clearly not the intent, right?
No.
I mean, what's logical depends on, right? I mean, so it's not really that it's logical. What is optimal as a course of action is not the same thing as what's logical, right? Which this movie doesn't know. But what's optimal depends on, like you say, your inputs and your values, right? So if the price of a life in Alphaville is worth $100,000, your calculations change as opposed to if it's worth $1 million, or 10 cents, right? And again, we might not like that there's a price to a life, but I'm sorry, there is.
There is. No, I agree.
Reality.
Yeah. Right. Here's something I would like to, because you're right, and you said obviously the film isn't intent on the preservation of life. You've seen that this thing tortures and executes people, so it's not. It's about maintaining certain rules. And so this is one of those things that sort of like when we are presented with AIs, and I think this is because we haven't got the experience we will have, I'm sure, of how they work. Because for all intents and purposes, they get beyond a learning point. Like, there was two, it was Meta, or previously Facebook, then they had two computers talking to each other. They let themselves have free reign. And within a day, these two computers had formed their own language and were sort of talking back and forth, and they had to turn them off because they were learning from each other. And they were like, can't be having that. Switch them off at the sort of, the base. Fine. But when you are presented with these things like Skynet, or Alpha 60, or the one from War Games, or any of those other kind of things, they're all driven by whatever is the intent, and that intent has to be driven home by human. Someone at some point, someone is sat at a keyboard typing in programming. Right? There's something that's the starting point. Now, the way the way Skynet appears to be different from these others, and I'm thinking of Westworld 2 as season 3 as well. These things is Skynet gained sentience. It became self-aware, is what they say, and so it becomes about, as we said, selfish. It becomes about preservation. It sees itself as it has to protect itself. The whole Judgment Day is about Skynet protecting itself. Alpha 60 and all these others have not got sentience, as far as we're aware. They're shown to be an advanced AI, but they haven't got sentience. So all their decision, all that logic is still based on rules and stuff that are embedded by people. So it's still not cold logic, because it's being driven by someone's typing in and saying there's a gate in here that says if this happens, then you go yes, or an if. It's like an if command, an and command, or an or command, or whatever. That's how all this will start.
Right.
And so to me, again, I don't know enough about programming or AIs to know how this works, but like surely that's the decision. You come back to this thing of you're driving along. In one, you have two paths. You have to take one of those paths. But on one path are three young people, and if you go down that path, you're gonna kill three of those. Or if you go down the other path, there's 10 elderly.
train.
Yeah, there's 10 elderly people.
Yeah.
Which one do you choose to go down? You can't stop. You've got to choose one.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of fact. And this is one of the fears they have for self-driving cars and stuff. But like you say, someone has to type that in. There's logic has to be typed in that says, well, this society is driven by youth and the potential for life. So we are going to protect the younger because there's more potential there. So we'll kill the elderly. Or this society is driven by a respect for the elderly and wisdom and stuff that's there. So actually would sacrifice the young. Do you know what I'm saying though?
I do, but all of this is thinking about it, if I may, in slightly the wrong way, right? It's still two human terms, right? So like,
yeah, that's my point though. That's my point.
The car that's the self-driving car that has to make that decision is not going to be making that decision based on, I have seen these three people and here's my estimation of their age. It's going to be making that decision based on conditions on the road, potential obstacles. It might identify a person and say, avoid this path has more people, but we're decades away from that car being able to ascertain their ages and make a moral decision in that way. I mean, as far as like AIs, and I'm not an expert, but you say like it depends what we program into it. That's true, except like the value of life is not something you can program in the same way, right? So like when you're talking about machines learning based on reading English, right? You can tell it like RoboCop style, like keep these directives, but the meaning of those directives, like how does RoboCop's brain, how does the machine that's strapped into his brain understand the meaning of those words, right? Yes. They change. So I mean, that's sort of as good as you can do, but there's no like sort of value for life equation, right? That's just like a line of code, the value $sign value _for _life equals, that you could just shift there. So yeah, I don't know. It is a problem, but I mean, ultimately it's just a movie. It's just a 1960s version of an AI. I mean,
it's a fair point. Maybe I'm digging too much into this thing that sort of, isn't, like you say, isn't actually really the point. It's a sort of it's a bit of a MacGuffin, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's an idea in a movie that's filled with ideas. I mean, and those ideas mostly work. They don't necessarily come together to form a narrative, right? But you mentioned that you like that interrogation, and that interrogation worked for you. It does for me too. But I really love how after that he's told that there were answers that he gave that made no sense. I thought, yeah, right, exactly. It's this sort of like alien understanding. We literally can't understand each other because we come from different societies. And it's true that, freedom does not mean the same thing in America as it does in France.
Yes.
Liberté, égalité, fraternité. I mean, that liberté is not the same thing as American freedom.
Yeah.
Like American freedom is like, I own my house. I'm going to build, an atomic reactor and guard it with a shotgun. Um, and the French are like, no, that's not, we're totally fine with you, with not being able to build above a certain level or controlling the color of my house so that it fits in with the neighborhood, or noise pollution,
Mm.
aesthetic pollution. Those are serious. That's not freedom. We have a different concept of freedom, and I feel very free to be myself on the streets of France. Um, I'm not worried about wearing the wrong shirt or something and being yelled at or looked at askance. Um, Whereas I am here, but here I can, sit on my porch with a shotgun if I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And tell
so
every,
it has to,
and then tell everybody how free you are. That's
yeah,
the,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
well, you've got to brag about it on
Yeah.
TikTok, or it doesn't happen.
No, it's
But
true.
it has to do with our values, and I think that
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Because it's the same here. In Britain, like there is much more of an acceptance of those sorts of things, of going like, well, there are rules to play by, and I don't agree with some of them, but they are some of them are for the greater good. And
Mhm.
so that freedom isn't a individual thing; it's a societal thing. Where no, as a society, we are free, but we are free because we agree to sort of live by certain rules. And that's sort of that social contract. So I agree. Yeah, that alien clash of those different concepts is interesting. But this is and that's again, like for me, this film, I love it to start to be interrogating those differences a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, that's still my problem with this film. Is it presents ideas and then doesn't do anything with them, because it's then just like, but it's pretty. But I've got a scene where every time someone talks, the other person looks away, and I'm just like, oh fuck off! Like that's just
I like all that stuff. I just don't think that it's not systematic, right? Like you and I both like these ideas. We like some of those scenes. We like the same scenes and have some of the same problems. It's just not trying to present this kind of systematic
no,
depiction of these two societies that don't understand each other. And I
yeah,
think that that's fascinating. They could do more with that. It would be fun to watch that, but that's
yeah.
not what the movie is doing.
What I would say is, you say about this film is presenting as well. I want to go back to the sort of the technical things and some of the
Mm.
choices it's made.
Mhm.
Um, and you're some of the arty stuff just bothers me, like the scene at the execution when they're overlooking the pool,
Mm.
and the person talking is in side profile, and then the person that is not talking turns to look in the pool, and they just keep doing this thing like some whose line is it anyway kind of thing. And I was like, oh no, that bothers me. And there's a couple of scenes like that where it gets, like you say, self-indulgent in the artiness. But the worst offending time of this is it has possibly the worst car chase I've ever seen on screen
Mm.
outside of being filmed. And there is a fight scene that is basically, it's like they filmed the choreographed rehearsal. Okay, so I'll do this and we'll do this. They just took photos of that, and then it ends with him.
Oh,
It
yes,
ends
yes, yes.
it ends with him placing this sort of other person. I'm not even, this. I think they work at whatever Alpha 60s. He places his head under the tire and then slowly drives over his head
Mm.
and looking out the window. And I was like, none of this. I was like laughing. I was chuckling. Like I was like,
Yeah, the film stills thing is really bad, and
yeah,
it does seem like I sort of classify it. I've seen a lot of like student films, some of which are amazing, but a lot of which you make silly mistakes. Like it's cool to see it in negative, like
yeah,
right, um, yeah, we couldn't. I mean, look, this is obviously sort of low budget. Um, the fight scenes are sort of limited. When you actually see like him in the corridor at Alpha 60, I've seen worse fight scenes in
mm-mm.
Hollywood films. But you're right. Then you get to this like weird. Well, we'll just do it in stills. I will say, I agree with you 100%. I didn't laugh, but I'm groaning inside. Uh, but I will say that once he is revealed to really be a secret agent, I mean, I love that he runs over the guy's head with a
Yeah, yeah,
car. Like once he's revealed to be a secret agent, this guy who's just taking pictures constantly and seems, sort of. I mean, he's a film noir character. He's sort of withdrawn. He's a machismo, sort of silent, strong, silent type. He just becomes like a Pulverhoven murderer. Like he just goes around and he's gunning people down. He's just going to all of the sites of the movie, accomplishing what he needs to do, and they are not prepared for somebody just coming in and shooting people. And it's so shocking and shockingly violent. That I agree with you that that's not done well. That's not edited well, and it's not shot well. But I do love his sort of change of, it's like, nothing to lose. I've been exposed as a secret agent. This society is not used to psycho killers, and I come from a
they're
place
not prepared
that has
for
psycho killers.
and yeah, it is. And this is the thing again. I'm watching this and going sort of like, there's a shift in this, and I would like this. Like, this is where, and I think of films where they have an actor like you say. This is such an atypical noir character. Like he's gruff and burly, and you can he can handle himself in a fight. And I mean, the oddity is that he opens with him killing a guy in his hotel room, so he's capable. Like this guy's not a problem. So I'm comfortable with that. But yeah, the switch up at the end where it's sort of almost like the civilized approach sort of goes out the window. Like he's not on the defensive anymore; he's on the offensive. It's one of those where you'd have like you'd expect that from the Bond is always on the offensive, so it's never really expected. But like I can imagine like this would be like a Bourne Ultimatum kind of thing where you have like Matt Damon, you go, oh, well, Matt Damon looks very civilized, and then he beats someone to death with a rolled up newspaper, and you're like, oh shit, like this is out of nowhere. And so I like that, but the way, unfortunately, again, because it's sort of it's all in this approach. Whilst again, I like the intent, I'm like, the execution just fails me, unfortunately. And it also leads to an ending.
How does it fail you?
So because I get
his rampage.
Yeah, because it all feels so stilted as well. Unfortunately, in its execution, that I'm just like, I get what
low
you're
budget,
doing.
not greatly
edited. But I've seen low budget films, and I don't want people shot and blood spraying everywhere. But like, I want that tension ramped up and stuff. So make it efficient, make it dark, make it look grimy. But like this just doesn't seem to want to do that. I don't know. It sort of seems to lose its track a little bit towards the end. But the other thing that when I actually chuckled and made me think a little bit almost of Austin Powers is at the end when he completes his mission, he kills Professor Von Braun, and I assume he shoots up the machine as well, like he shoots up Alpha 60. He then leaves. This is when you get all the negative, and people are just like rolling around the walls and crawling on the floors, and there becomes this narration where it's like, yeah, as I finished, like people just went crazy, and those that didn't die just went. I'm like, what happened?
I don't know.
What connection did they have to the computer? Like, this is where I'm going, like, I want to know. Like, there's something mad here. Like, okay, how did they have a chip in them? Were they sort of like, were they all connected to Alpha 60? Were they all robots? Like, what is going on?
Is there something being broadcast that's like affecting their minds and helping them to kind of forget the meaning of certain words? No, You're right. It doesn't make sense. And it's another thing where it's like, it's a cool idea. I don't know that they have the budget to really pull it off, or again, you point out quite rightly, it's not just budget, right? I mean, it's Godard and what he wants to do, but yeah, I mean, it's another one of these things where it's like, I don't really understand. If you're trying to understand and want everything to make sense, you're just coming at this the wrong way, right? I mean, and I have the same complaint that you do. I don't know. It's totally bizarre. It's the idea of like the city falling apart and everyone, being totally unmoored with this AI destroyed. That's cool, but it's the kind of thing where you'd say, all right, buddy, you've got a cool idea for this movie. You haven't thought that stuff through, right?
Yeah.
And you haven't thought how to present it throughout the narrative so that this is not new information when this happens. not because that is what a conventional narrative does. By all means, surprise us. I mean, look, we've talked off camera about how the Batman, totally fails to do this in exactly
You
the same
you
way.
you've talked about it.
It's objectively a
yeah.
terrible film, but and it fails to do this, in exactly the same way. But I mean, you certainly can't complain that Alphaville hasn't mentioned that people are, somehow connected, symbolically or physically to the AI, and then also say, oh, by the way, Gotham is surrounded, it's like New Orleans surrounded by a lock system, and
All right.
yeah,
Yeah. All right.
I mean, my point is, you can do these things and have them be symbolic and interesting, but the reason why you want to, as a writer, weave these through the movie or through the narrative is because it is then more satisfying to the audience when the gun has been introduced in the first act that goes
Yeah.
off in the third.
Well, to me, let's say the Chekhov's gun in all of this that is mentioned throughout the film and should really have been is the key point, because he does it actually go there. They call it central control.
Mm.
So when he arrives, like 3 or 4 people say to him, like, "Oh, you've got to check in with central control."
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, like I'm not doing that." And then another person's like, "You should really check in with central control." Like, and eventually, even Natasha says, "Like, have you checked in with central control?" Like, they keep pushing him to this thing. Like, at no point does he say, "Oh, what is it that you want me to get from central control?" And that's when they'll be like, "Oh, you get, it allows the whatever track you. You get this earpiece. You get this whatever the bloody hell, whatever the hell it is."
Yeah.
When you're in this city, you have to have this device because that's the way it works, and that's what drives people mad. There you go, solved it. One blood. He doesn't have to. He can reject it throughout. But we also know, because the one thing I like is obviously he takes Natasha at the end and he basically sort of knocks her out, and then it's like, or they don't. It's talk about art. I'm sorry, but the whole ending, them rolling around the room. She's in one of those interrogation rooms, or she's looking through one of the interrogation rooms, and the moment that he sort of like surfaces up, like he sort of like appears like a Muppet on the other side of the window, and then he says they have this conversation with Alpha 60 and says, like, well, no, I will show you what happiness is. We're in love, and I'm like, yeah, you look it, you grumpy git. And then when they leave, they lower out of shot on the other side of the glass. And again, I'm just like, it's one of those things that, again, you say as a student film, you think, oh, that looks cool, and it hasn't, but it doesn't translate. It looks silly, and unfortunately, I'm like, it then breaks that tension. And so that's the problem I had with the parts of the end. But yeah,
and it is sort of, well, I mean, I do see sort of Blade Runner influences of kind of like you leaving with the girl and
the relationship. The whole relationship with Natasha and Deckard. Well, I you see, I think Deckard and Lemmy are so similar, and then Rachel and Natasha, like, so intrinsically linked to the main thing, like, and being pulled out of the system to go, and then you're not entirely sure if she's got the number on the back, so you're not entirely sure what she is. Like, it's more,
or like, is there really love there?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, Ridley Scott watched this and was like,
oh yeah,
no one's seen this in America, so I'm going to make this film.
Yeah, there definitely is an influence there. And it's an evocative ending. I mean,
It is.
I mean,
yeah.
the thing is, like, I mean, when I know we've got to wrap up, but I will say I am more willing to forgive this and more willing to forgive Brazil, because they are not trying to. I mean, but especially this, where they're not trying to present a logical, conventional narrative in the same way, right? I mean, I love who's the guy who does like the Tree of Life? What's his
Aronofsky.
name? No. Anyway, the director who, God, I'm sorry. Anyway, it's got dinosaurs in the Tree of Life with Brad Pitt, and it's like a 1950s reminiscence, but we're gonna go back in time to that. And he did the Thin Red Line.
Oh,
Um,
Malik.
yeah, Terrence Malick. I mean, Terrence Malick is totally indulgent, and there are these
Yeah.
weird emotional sequences, but it sticks with you and it's brilliant. And you kind of don't get to say like, right, why are there dinosaurs there? Because it's a Terrence Malick film. I mean, this is a Godard film, and in a way, I do feel like when a movie says we are the logical movie, Chekhov's gun applies here. We're not just presenting a kind of like impressionistic thing that has a bunch of ideas, and hopefully you enjoy it. For me, those errors are more frustrating in a movie like The Batman or something like that than they are here, where it's like, it is what it is. I mean, it's not pretending to be a deep presentation of two different cultures clashing.
Yeah, I think that's the part of the problem for me, though, is that sort of like, if it's not going to be that sort of analysis of two cultures clashing and with a detailed plot and character sort of development and interactions, it's going to be this arty thing over here. All right, then do it really well. I expect you to be technically brilliant, and I expect you to be thematically tight in everything else you're doing. If you're not, and you're not this, then you are failing across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I am a huge fan of European cinema, the history of European cinema. I've taught French cinema. I am not a big fan of French New Wave, which is like what the French cinema is most famous for, right? And what sort of became the dominant artsy movement after Italian neorealismo. And partly it's because of everything you're saying. That it seems to me a lot of these films, especially Godard, is sort of meandering plots. I appreciate elements of them. I appreciate that he's the characters are outsiders. They're, all of these themes are there, but they're not concerned with that sort of tightness. When you say a tightness of theme, right? Consistency of theme, elaborating on theme. Yeah, that's not going to happen in these movies. And they are what they are. I think it's cool that Godard made a sci-fi movie and it's black and white and it's had an influence, and I think it's worth seeing and talking about. But I know what you're saying.
The thing is, I think about past films that we've watched in this sort of in this sort of thing. Just to sort of wrap up on this, I'll consider this my final thoughts. I think of the films. I thought about the influence on Blade Runner and those and the way it's shot, and there's obviously that noir influence and the whole plot and the relationship between Deckard and Rachel and so on and so forth. Fine, all that's kind of good. There's some good moments in this. There's some good character moments. I think Anna Karina as Natasha Van Bron is good. I think she has some scenes that are actually very, very good. Eddie Constantine as Lemmy Caution is kind of fun in some scenes. Like there's every time the bellboy tries to go for a tip and he keeps slapping his hand away and stuff like that. Like it's fun. Like he's if he was in a straightforward film, I'd kind of want to follow him as a character. The problem for me comes is though, like, what is this? Mm-hmm. If you talk about art and about these things, if it's a tight, straightforward espionage film, and we've got some of those where it's going to be, we're going to have this character and it's going to be this sort of, you mentioned like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy or something like that, where it's going to be an intricate plot but no one's really the hero, it's more about sort of like the shifting of states and all this other stuff. Cool, I'm all for that because I like that. That's a good, I like the idea of that. Or go full James Bond and have the adventure, do that as well, whatever you want to do. But if you're going to go arty, The Fountain, I think of like The Fountain, which we watched, and in the last season, I wasn't as enamored of that. I liked it and I thought it was very, very good, and there were scenes that I chuckled at that as well, and sort of said to you that there were certain scenes where the floating bald Hugh Jackman appears at the end and I was like, what's going on? And you pointed certain things out. However, as an art film, which that very much is, it is stunningly beautiful. Like, the presentation is phenomenal. You know, it knows what it wants to do. It's a tristy on death and cycles of life and grief and guilt and all this other stuff. And so you are sort of locked in this thing. And you, even if I'm not fully plot-wise engaged, like, that film still takes you on an emotional roller coaster where at the end of it, I'm like, what did I just watch? Like, something just kicked me in the gut, and I'm engaged with it. And then I think about other things like Eyes Without a Face, where we said the film was like poetry. It was like this thing of just sort of like this art. It was artistic in that sense of it flowed and it had these weird things, but and the ending was almost like a fairy tale of sort of like, well, what happens next and all these other things. Like, and we've watched these films where I've gone like, I want to know more. I'm engaged and I love this film, or I'm really enjoying this film. Where the thing is with this, there is nothing for me to grab onto. Like, the plot, I'm struggling with the plot. The characters are all right. There's some stuff, and then you get to the artistic points, and it's almost laughable in places. We're gonna have a fight done with stills they're not stills, by the way. It's just people holding position. They're not stills because other things are moving. It's people being filmed in fixed positions, and that made it worse. And stuff like that. And so I'm watching it, I'm going like, artistically, this doesn't work for me. Like, there's nothing in here I'm appreciating. And then it got bad editing where I'm like, technically it's not good. It's not plot wise. So unfortunately, this film sort of just, you used a really good point. You said it will collapse in on itself. That's what this film did for me. It just collapsed in on itself of like, I've no idea what I'm supposed to take from this. I didn't walk away with this having had an experience. Positive at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously my instincts are not to Godard and not to this sort of impressionistic, throw it all in there and hope for the best. It's all art and poetry, baby. I mean, that's not the way my brain works. My brain is very structural and overly so, if anything. So this is not, in some sense, a movie for me. Maybe because of that, I'm able to kind of let go of some of those things, especially because this is not my first viewing, and see those things that you and I both like. I think some of the performances are great. I think some of these ideas are great. I think the, dictionary stuff and the words disappearing, I love that stuff. Reminds me of other other works that I kind of like better. But I do think this is it's an interesting film. It's a film that you hate less the more you see. That's going to go on the back of Julian Darius. You'll hate this less the more you see it.
Yeah, okay. What's that syndrome they say when kidnappers, you fall in love with your kidnapper? Is that what this is? That sort of like...
yeah. I forget what it's called.
But yeah, the more, if I was to be sort of held in a room and I'd be like, after 15 hours of watching this film, I'm totally in love with it.
No, but I mean, I don't know. One of the reasons why I like putting films like this, in the list, and I like watching these films. So I don't think any of us watch enough films like this.
No.
And even if this is not a masterpiece, I think it's very influential. This is a relatively early depiction of, totalitarian society that is done well, at least in those respects. I think it's much more influential than it is sort of successful on its own terms as a film.
Yeah.
But I don't think we watch enough foreign film and weird stuff. And I do think that my brain goes back to Alphaville. I don't enjoy watching it. Okay.
No.
By and large, there's stuff that I love. I love his rampage, and I love some of the weirdness of it. But I don't by and large watch this and go, I'm on the edge of my seat and I'm loving this so much. But my brain goes back to it in a way that so much trash that comes out of Hollywood, I think, is anyone ever going to remember this? And why would you want to watch or make a movie that nobody is ever going to remember or say, that's my favorite movie? I want to have a discussion about that. I could have a discussion of. We just have had a discussion about Alphaville, and I think it's fascinating. In some ways, it's more satisfying than the movie. You know.
Yeah, you are right, and I think that I like. But the thing is,
Syndrome.
Stockholm Syndrome. Here you go. Yeah, I think the thing is, you're right. There are two things just to highlight. Like, you know, when a film reminds me of things, and I do think, oh, that's better. I want to go watch Blade Runner, or oh yeah, I want to go watch something else. That's a problem. Now it might be that these. Obviously, you're right. I think this has massive influence. But that's the problem. And I'm going like, oh yeah, that's really cool actually. Oh man, I wish I'm going to go watch that. Like, that's the issue. And you think you're right about having the conversation, but I do think there's mainstream. I think the mainstream at the moment is massively populated by sort of like easy to swallow pop culture. Like that's always been the case. It has been for a long time, but I think in certain genres there's still there are studios that are allowing this to happen. Like A24 in particular. Now it's more in the horror genre, I will admit, at the moment. But like you've had like The Witch, The Lighthouse, even like Midsummer. Like they're willing to go. You know, yeah, we're going to be weird. Like we don't. I don't really care if you like it, but this is what we're doing. You know, like we're not going to be sort of like hitting up the mainstream. We're going to do this. And I would like to see maybe some sci-fi do that as well. There's a few. There are some, like, you know, it's very sort of like the Lobster and is it like is it called Henry and the Robot or something? There's a couple that you see come out and you go, oh, they're a bit weird and small and funky, but like I'd like a bit more to go in that direction. But you said about Nolan, you know, like I actually haven't seen Tenet yet. I haven't seen it. I just haven't got around to it really. But like I like the fact that, you know, we are being given those opportunities. I just wish, like you said, there'd be a bit more of it. Not this per se, but like more of those. So I agree on that front. I would like to discuss those weird films. And any last comments before we do wrap out?
No. But again.
Finn is what I think was.
Oh, that ending. Like, I mean, I agree with you. Even that ending where one letter of fin appears at a time, and then the little dot over the I is very student film, right? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Oh well. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you have
forced you to watch Alphaville.
Yeah, no, you're right. Watching these is important, and you know, I've enjoyed when you have brought in these sort of the foreign element, and you are right that we should watch more of these because it exposes me to this. I still think of Solaris from back in season 1. Like, I still think of that film, and I want to watch Stalker at some point. I really do. So you know that definitely had an influence, but we should introduce more. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you have watched Alphaville, it is available on Studio Canal as a channel, and I think it's available other places as well. Go check it out. Let us know what you think, and come back and tell us. You know, are we right? Are we wrong? What did you like? What did you dislike about this film? What did you chuckle at? Let me know. I really want to go. Come find us on social media at PodTimeSpace on Twitter, or leave a review. Just go on your podcast catcher and leave a review, 5 stars, and then tell us what you thought of Alphaville. That would be a Christmas present for us, early Christmas present. But if you really like what we're doing here, you will find that between these main episodes, we are now dropping our Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. You're going to be listening to season 1 every other week, episode by episode, through season 1 of the original classic Sterling Twilight Zone. However, if you want the full first 2 seasons of that, pretty much, join our Patreon. And even at the lowest level, which I think is sort of like £5, which I don't know, it's about like a couple of dollars, I'm not sure what that is, you will get Trekking Through the Twilight Zone on a weekly basis. Every Tuesday or Wednesday, we sort of drop those out. And then you get a monthly podcast, 30-minute thoughts, a quarterly podcast where I bring on a creator to talk about different things. So there's so much going on there. So go check out our Patreon. It really helps us, keeps the lights on in the space station.
Tower.
It's 20th Century Towers. 20th Century. It's www.patreon.com/20 CG Media. That's 20th Century Geek Media. And you're right. It helps keep the lights on at 20th Century Towers. So.
And while I love going through the Twilight Zone with you, I also want to recommend your 30-minute thoughts, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, they're just me going on some rant for 30 minutes and then Unfortunately, often I'll do those, and then an hour later, I'm like, oh, I forgot to mention this thing. Oh, well.
It's always the way.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. Greatly appreciate it. And we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.